That's what we got, right? I'm going to make a mistake, and you're going to call me on it. Here's my mistake. Tell me what the mistake is. First of all, have I done universal instantiation wrong? Have I broken any of the rules of universal instantiation? No, because can I do universal instantiation to this? Yes, because the main connected is a universal quantifier. So I can do universal instantiation. Can I use the name A?
Yeah, sure.
Universal, I can use whatever name I damn well please. And have I used the same name? Yes, I have. So I haven't done it wrong. Well, another mistake I could have made is that I could have not used you when I need to use you. Do I need to use you for this? No. When do you need to use the name you? When I have to do universal generalization, which will usually happen when the conclusion is a universal. But the conclusion is an existential. So I'm going to use existential generalization, and you can do that to any name. You don't have to use the name you. So I've done it, I haven't broken any rules, and I didn't have to use you. So what's my mistake?
You should have done the existential instantiation first.
Exactly. Remember, when you have a mixture of universal and existential, you do the existential first. All right, so I'll do that in a second. But before I get to that, remember what I told you. Most proofs in predicate logic go this way. You do instantiation to get rid of the quantifiers, then you do a proof as if there weren't any quantifiers at all, regular old proof, and then you generalize to get the quantifier back in the conclusion, if there is one. Well, let's do the middle part. Let's work out what the middle part is. And you can work out what the middle part is by basically treating it like we used to, like our old kind of proof. Like it was a good old-fashioned proof before we had to do predicates. Imagine this is our argument. Prove it. What should I do first? Simplification. What line, everybody? And what do I get? P. I could get R, but I want P. Why do I want P? Because of what I'm about to do, which is modus ponens. What two lines? 1 and 3. What's that going to give me, everybody? Q. All right. Oh, look, I've got Q. Now I need R. How am I going to get R? Simplification of line 2. And then what's my final move? Not addition, conjunction. That's right. R and Q, which is conjunction 5, 4. So that's the proof. I'm going to be doing that in the middle once I've gotten rid of the quantifiers, and then at the end I'm going to add the quantifiers back. So here's how it's going to go. See how fast I wrote that? That was good, wasn't it? So I have to do the existential instantiation first. This was the mistake, doing universal first, because then I couldn't match the name. So I do existential instantiation, then I do universal instantiation, I can use the same name. Then I do basically what we just did. Simplify P, do modus ponens, simplify R, do conjunction, finish it off with existential generalization. It's actually a pretty straightforward proof. It looks more complicated because of the messy business of getting rid of and adding back the quantifiers. But at its heart, it's a pretty simple argument. Now, in number 4, suppose P stands for blank pushes blank. What does this say? Something pushes everything. This says something pushes everything. God, presumably, the prime mover. What does this say? Everything is pushed by something. You can derive this from this, but not the other way round. Because this has only one person, one thing pushing everything. This just says there is something that pushes everything. Could be different things. All right, how are we going to get to this from this? In fact, actually, this one should be fairly straightforward because there's only ever one thing you can do at each moment. You just have to make sure it's the right thing that you do. What is the only thing I can do to premise 1? Existential instantiation, which involves getting rid of this, which would leave everything the same, except I replace the x with a name. Let's use A, because we're incredibly unimaginative. Now what? So that's existential instantiation 1. Now what? What's that? If I do existential generalization, I'll end up with something with an existential one. I'll be back where I started. But I want something where the main connective is the universal. So what is the last thing I'm going to do?
Universal generalization.
Universal generalization, because I'm going to end up with that. So what do I do next?
Universal instantiation.
Right. And because the last thing I'm going to do is universal generalization, what name am I going to use? U. So that was universal instantiation, line 2. And we end up with the first name of a Spanish power forward. All right. Only people who follow basketball will know what the hell I'm talking about. All right, now what?
Existential generalization.
Existential generalization. What variable shall I use, x or y?
X.
X, because I'm doing existential generalization, and this is the existential quantifier. So existential generalization 3 is going to give me, I'm not going to existentially generalize from U, because that would be a waste. So I'm going to have PXU. Now what? Everybody, what's the last thing I do? Universal generalization. I universally generalize from U, and I'm going to use the Y, and I get this. Yeah, that's, every single one of them gets used. Isn't that nice? Everybody gets a turn. Now, as it says, this is a version of a well-known argument from philosophy of religion. I tend to use arguments from philosophy of religion, like, for example, when I was introducing proofs, I gave another argument from philosophy of religion. They tend to be, they tend to lend themselves to symbolization. I don't know if that's because medieval monks did two things: argue about God and work on logic, so the two things go together well. But anyway, also I teach philosophy of religion fairly commonly, and I'm just familiar with the arguments. So, it is an actual argument, and it is of interest. Like most intriguing arguments, it is an argument with premises that just about anybody could agree with, but a controversial conclusion. So it's worth testing to see whether or not it's a valid argument. So, the first premise is basically a definition of omnipotence. There we go. It says anything that is omnipotent can do all actions. Basically, anything omnipotent can do anything. The second one is all sins are actions. Now, you'd have to have kind of a loose definition of actions, because there are such things as sins of omission, which is basically where you're bad for doing nothing, as in the last ever episode of Seinfeld, where they don't help a guy on the other side of the road. In fact, they laugh at him. But I think, in general, that's fairly non-controversial. God can do no sin, because God is perfect, God can't sin. Sins exist. I had to add this one. I symbolized this, and then I tried to do the proof and realized that it wouldn't work without this. And it wouldn't work without this, because these are all, take one of those, Jake. These are all universal claims, and the conclusion is specific. So you if you remember when we were doing categorical syllogisms, and we talked about how in modern logic there's an extra rule of validity. That is, you cannot have the premises be universal and the conclusion be particular. That's what I was doing here. If I just had these premises that are all universal claims, they don't have existential import, but the conclusion does. So I had to add this extra one, which is an existential claim. Sins exist. seems pretty obvious, but you have to state it. Okay, so all of these seem pretty self-evidently, seem pretty non-controversial. Most people could agree with those. But the conclusion is God is not omnipotent, which is fairly controversial because God being omnipotent is one of the usually accepted claims of the major world religions. Alright, so let's see if we can first of all symbolize all of the premises and the conclusion, and then we'll try and prove it. First, try and symbolize it. I've given you the predicates. O is a one-place predicate, meaning blank is omnipotent. A is a one-place predicate, meaning blank is an action. S is a one-place predicate, meaning blank is a sin. D is a two-place predicate, meaning blank can do blank. You also need the name G. What will the name G refer to? God, because God is mentioned in the conclusion. So see if you can symbolize those, first of all. I'm going to skip over the first premise, because that's the most complicated one. Done. Number 2, all sins are actions. Symbolize for me, please.
For any x.
So universal quantifier.
For x. If x is a sin, if Sx,
Yep.
then Ax,
Then
something is an action.
there you go. For everything in the universe, if it's a sin, then it's an action. Ethan, God can do no sin. Now, first of all, notice that I have bolded the quantity word. So what type is that?
E.
It's an E type. Okay, so symbolize away.
Universal x. If x is a sin, so Sx, then tilde.
Yeah, because this is an E type, you know that there's going to be a conditional and a tilde right next to each other.
Then D, Gx.
Then it is not the case that God can do it. So for everything in the universe, if it's a sin, then it is not the case that God can do it. Okay, sins exist, Josh. Not that you would know anything about such things.
Existential quantifier. Sx.
That's right. That's not even a categorical proposition because there's only one predicate. Finally, Karen, we're going to put you at risk of the lightning bolt. Can you symbolize God is not omnipotent? What quantifier are you going to need?
Universal.
No.
Okay. Existential.
No.
Quantifier.
It was a trick question. You're not going to need a quantifier. Why not? Because it's using a name. So no quantifiers. What predicate are you going to need?
I'm going to need O.
You are?
It's
Oh, I should do it in red because it's the conclusion.
just going to be tilde O little g.
That's right. OG for original gangster. That is correct. Not tilde OG. Okay, Cat, you're in luck. You get the difficult one. Now, this is this is going to need 2 quantifiers. So it's going to be, we're going to do it like we did before with the nested quantifiers. But the first one is anything. So what type of categorical syllogism is that?
Universal.
Yeah, it's an A type. So it's going to look like this. Universal, and then conditional, and then it's going to look like that essentially. Now, anything what? So you specify what the thing is that you're talking about here. It's anything that,
Omnipotent.
so how are we going to say that?
Big O X.
Yes. And so anything that is omnipotent can do all actions. So how do you say X can do something? That's what we'll say here.
G, X, Y.
Yes, and obviously we're going to need Y to refer to all actions because it's a quantity of things. Okay, so this is the main categorical syllogism. But there's also another categorical syllogism because of this second quantity word. Now, because that's an all, what type is this categorical proposition? It's A, E, I, or O. It's another A type. So, quantifier. What type of quantifier?
Universal.
What variable?
Y.
Y. Okay, so it's gonna have Y, and then there's gonna be a conditional. What is Y? That's right. So for everything in the universe, if it's omnipotent, then for all things that are actions, the omnipotent thing can do the action. There you go. All right. We have symbolized the argument. Now, we're going to try and prove it. Jake, start us off. We have 4 premises. Now, 4 premises, can we instantiate all of them? Is there any of these premises that we can't instantiate? No, we can instantiate all of them. Now, there is one quantifier that we can't instantiate, which is that. What's that?
The universal y.
Yes, we can't instantiate this one because it's not the main connected. But we can instantiate this one because it has the whole line in its scope. We can instantiate this one, we can instantiate this one, we can instantiate this one. So, now, as I've said, the normal way that you do proofs in predicate logic is you instantiate everything, do the proof, and then generalize to get the quantifier back at the end. Of course, we're not going to have to do the generalizing at the end because there isn't a quantifier in the conclusion. So that's one difference. All right, so we're going to instantiate. Which one? Can we just pick whichever one we want to start with, or is there one we should instantiate first? The existential, said Jake in a funny voice. Yes, the existential. Why?
Because you just always start with the existential like that.
That's right, you do always start with the existential. Why?
Existential instantiation has a rule that universal instantiation doesn't.
Exactly. Existential has this extra restriction that you can't match the name that you've already used, but we are going to want to match the name, so we get the existential first. All right, so we're going to do existential instantiation line 4. What's that going to give us, Jake? S and a name. Pick a name.
Just
Don't overthink this.
SG.
No, it wouldn't be G. If it was SG, what would that be saying in English? God is a sin.
Oh no.
You would be
okay.
blaspheming. What?
I'm not very religious though.
So you wouldn't have a problem with that. Let's say SA, because we're unimaginative. And I'm going to tell you what A is. A is a specific instance of lying to your granny. That's definitely a sin. Okay. So what this says in English is lying to your granny is a sin. That's another thing we're going to do. Because we know what each of these predicates stand for, we're going to know what each of the lines means in English. This first one means lying to your granny is a sin. Zainab, what next?
If it's A, then A. Capital A, small a. The person is the instantiation.
Good. What? Line 2. All right. Now, what does that mean in English?
Flying to your
If.
granny is a sin.
Yeah. If lying to your granny is a sin, then.
The lying to your granny is an action.
Yes. True. A bit boring, but there you go. All right. What should we do next, Bryn? Well, we're going to have to instantiate all the lines eventually. There is actually something we can already do with lines 5 and 6 if we wanted. Or we can just instantiate, doesn't really matter. What is it that we can do with lines 5 and 6? If you think of line 6 first and then line 5. What inference form does that suggest to you? Modus ponens. So modus ponens 6, 5 will give us what?
Capital A.
Yes. Which means what? Is an
Action.
yes, lying to grandma is an action. An odd thing to say, but true nonetheless. All right. Hunter.
SA and not DGA.
How'd you get that?
Existential.
No, not existential.
Oh, universal.
So universal instantiation. What line? 3. What does that mean in English? See, this is why you should cut down on the smoking, Jake.
Lying to your grandma is a sin. Yeah, it's a sin then. Lying to your grandma.
If lying to your grandma is a sin, then God can't do it. Something your gran will be pleased to know. God can't lie to her. All right. What next? Jordan.
Capital O A.
No.
No?
You want, so what you're doing is, you're doing the right thing. You're doing universal instantiation of line 1, right?
Yes.
Now, you picked the name A.
Oh.
What name would be a better choice? What's that?
B.
No, not B, because remember, it's universal instantiation, so you can pick any name you like. You don't have to do a new one. But you said OA. Lying to your grandmother is omnipotent. What do you want? What? Look at the conclusion.
Yeah. But jeez. Can you just do that?
Of course, yeah, because it's universal instantiation. You can use a name that occurs before in universal instantiation.
G.
Keep going.
Then Y. Capital A. Y. Then capital G. G. Y.
Yes, and notice that you've got the G in the right place there too, so that's going to be good. So, oh, and close parentheses. What does that mean in English? If
God is omnipotent,
then
something is an action.
then God can do all actions. That makes sense? If God is omnipotent, then God can do all actions. Because remember, the original meant anything that is omnipotent can do all actions, and we've just replaced the anything with God. So if God is omnipotent, then God can do all actions. Yeah? Why are you looking so puzzled
I'm
and
just so confused about all
troubled?
of this.
Well, but what gave us the clue that we needed to use G there? That it's in the conclusion. We're going to want to get OG in the conclusion. So we have to get that somewhere, and this is the only occurrence of O in the premises. So we're going to want to stick G onto it. Otherwise we're not going to be able to get it in the conclusion. And besides, who better to be omnipotent than God? All right. Now, there is one more easy thing, or relatively easy thing we can do. Samantha?
Modus ponens, 7 and 5.
Modus ponens, what was that again?
7 and 5.
7 and 5.
Oops, on my paper it's 8 and 5.
Yes, 8 and 5. Which gives us what?
It would be tilde 3, little d, and then 8.
What does that mean?
God cannot do lying to your granny.
Yes, God can't. Lying to your granny is something God cannot do. Yes. Now, we've done the easy stuff. Now we have to do a little bit of lateral thinking. Remember that I said way back when we were doing proofs to begin with, there are essentially two approaches. There's the bottom, and I'm not talking about conditional proof or reductio ad absurdum. I mean in general, doing proofs in general. There's the bottom-up method where you just mess around and see what you can do. Essentially, that's what we've been doing. With the one exception is when we had to plan ahead to know that we wanted G there. Otherwise, we've just been doing whatever we can do. We've just been instantiating or doing modus ponens when it jumped out at us. But now we have to sit back and think, okay, we're trying to get this. What line are we going to use to get that? What's that? 9. Because that's the only place where it shows up. Now, we want to get the negation of OG, and OG is the antecedent of a conditional here. So what inference form are we going to use to get it? Modus tollens, right? Because modus tollens gives us as a conclusion the negation of the antecedent of a conditional. Modus tollens looks like this. You know, if you have if square, then triangle, not triangle, conclusion, not square. In other words, we end up with the negation of the antecedent, which is what we want to do. So, to be able to do modus tollens, what are we going to need? We're going to need not triangle. In other words, the negation of the consequent. So we're going to need this with a negation in front of it. We're going to need not y, ay, then dgy. Now that looks like it's going to be a royal pain in the ass to get. But actually, it's not going to be that tricky. What is our first step to getting that?
Conjunction.
Conjunction. Very good. Of what two lines? 7 and 10, which gives us AA and not DGA. Which means lying to your gran is an action and God can't do it. Somebody who hasn't said anything yet. What was that?
Implication.
Brian, yes, implication. Now implication, that is my favorite. Implication always involves a conditional, because we're not starting with a conditional, we're going to end up with a conditional. So, there are 3 stages when it involves and conditional. First stage, replace the and with a conditional. Second stage, negate this one, so instead of not DGA, it's going to be just DGA. We don't do anything to the antecedent, but the third stage is negate the whole thing. So that's what implication is going to give us. Huh. We're pretty close to getting this. In fact, how close? Here's a question for you. Can we just go straight from this to this by universal generalization? Answer yes or no? No. For 2 reasons. First reason, what is the only name you're allowed to do universal generalization to?
U.
U. Is this U? No, it's A. And notice that it was introduced by existential instantiation. So there's no way it could have been U, because you can't introduce U by universal instantiation. That's the one reason why we can't do universal generalization. But even if this was U, you couldn't get this by universal generalization. Why not? Because what has to be the main connective when you've done universal generalization? What has to end up as the main connective? The quantifier. What is the main connective here? The tilde. So you couldn't end up with, if you do generalization, you have to end up with something where the quantifier is on the left. Here the tilde is on the left. So we're going to do this in 2 steps. What is the first step? Existential generalization. Good. So line 12. First of all though, what does line 12 mean? Who wants to say what it is in English?
It's not the case that the flying to your gran is an action, then God can lie to your gran.
Yes. It is not the case that if flying to your granny is an action, then God can do it. Alright, what is existential generalization going to give me? Well, first of all, because it's generalization, it's going to end up with the existential quantifier. Oh, I've done something wrong already. What have I done wrong? I want y, because I'm trying to convert it into this. So I don't want x, I want y. And then we have the tilde immediately after it. and then we go through this and replace all the a's with y's. So we get a y, then d g y. This means there is something such that it is not the case that if it's an action, then God can do it. Okay? And that's line 13, not 12. Okay, not 12.2. Somebody who has not said anything yet. How about you, Destiny? If you said something, you said it too quietly. What is my next step? I'll give you a hint. We're trying to get this. We have this. What is the step? Quantifier negation. Magic hopping tilde. The tilde hops over the quantifier, sprinkles the magic pixie dust, and it changes. And then we have what we wanted. What does this mean? It is not the case that yes, it is not the case. Well, it's not the case that God can do all actions. Yes, it is not the case that God can do all actions. But if it's not the case that God can do all actions, what does that mean? God is not omnipotent. And how do we get that? Modus tollens. What two lines? 9 and 14. There you go. I gave you an argument in English, we symbolized it, and we proved it. All right. Now, if you're a little worried about this, don't worry. This is a well-known argument in philosophy of religion. What we've shown is that this argument is valid. And it's a valid argument with the conclusion that God is not omnipotent. Does that mean we have to accept that God is not omnipotent? No. But if we want to reject the conclusion, if we want to say the conclusion is false, what will that mean?
We have to reject at least one premise.
Right. What is impossible is for all the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false, given that this is valid. But what's perfectly possible is for the conclusion to be false and at least one of the premises to be false. That can happen all the time. So if you're we proved that this is a valid argument. If you want to reject the conclusion, you have to reject one of the premises. And that's where people usually go. This is a bad one to reject. I think most people would... well, you could deny this, but the kind of people who would deny this would be atheists anyway. They would say, I don't believe in sin. God can do no sin. Some people say, well, it's not the case that God can't do sins, it's just the case that he doesn't. A lot of people want to say that, but that's kind of tricky because if God is perfect, then it's not really possible for him to do sin. So that one, some people reject that one. All sins are actions. You could say that there are sins of omission, but that's not really an interesting one. That's kind of equivalent. This is usually the one that people target. What they say is that actually you can be omnipotent and not be able to do some things. Now that seems a little weird, but the classic example is making a rock so heavy. Can God make a rock so heavy that he can't lift it? You know, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if he can make the rock, there's something he can't do, which is what?
Lift it.
Lift it. And if he can't make the rock, well, obviously there's something he can't do, which is make the rock. Some people say, well, he can do anything, so he can make the rock that he can't lift and then lift it.
Can you make a habanero too spicy for him?
Yeah, so microwave a burrito so hot that he can't eat it. Yeah, there's all sorts. But anyway, I just wanted to show that we can put it all together. We're putting the symbolization and the proof together in one delicious package. There you go. Question 1. All right. Question 1 is difficult. All right, I have said that. Now, actually, question 1 is not that difficult. What should I do first? Well, let me ask this question. Can I instantiate line 2?
No.
No, I cannot. Why can I not instantiate line 2? The quantifier is not the main connective. What is? The tilde. I can instantiate line 1. Should I instantiate line 1 first?
No.
No. Why? Because of what I'm going to do to line 2. If I do something to line 2, I can make a quantifier the main connective. What is the thing I can do to line 2? Quantify negation. But what's that going to do besides move the tilde?
Make it an X. Existential.
Make it an existential. So suppose I do that. Should I then instantiate line 1?
No.
No. I should instantiate the existential because that's the rule. You should always instantiate the existential first. All right. So quantify negation, then instantiate. Now, look at, am I going to need to use the name U? When do you need to use the name U? When you're planning to do what? Universally generalized. Oh look, in the conclusion there's a universal quantifier. Am I going to have to universally generalize?
Not necessarily.
No, I am not. Not necessarily. Necessarily not. Well, actually not. Why not? Why am I not going to need to do universal generalization?
Because quantify negation to get there.
Right. In other words, this is equivalent to this. And I'm going to get that by existential generalization. And you can do existential generalization to any old name. So what that tells me is I'm going to want to get something like this. And then I'm going to do existential generalization to it, and then I'm going to do quantify negation, and then I'll have the conclusion. There are two ways to get that. Well, there's probably many ways, but probably the easier way is once you instantiate, so first of all, you change this into an existential, and then you instantiate, and you will have the negation of a conditional. Usually when you see something, the negation of a conditional, you should think my favorite rule of equivalence, which is what? Implication. And the negation of a conditional is equivalent to, so in other words, not if P then Q is equivalent to P and not Q. In other words, you change this to this, you negate this one, and you get rid of this by implication. Well, that's going to give you two things that you're going to need. That will end up with you getting this. Okay? Don't look like that, Karen. So you will have the negation of a condition that only will be not if AA then CA. And then you can do implication to it, and then you can it's going to help you with this. You will have not CA, and if you look at this and not CA, an inference form should occur. There is a quicker way of doing this, which doesn't involve you doing implication, but the implication route is easier. With number 2, same deal. You are going to get this by existential generalization and quantify negation. A couple of things though. Can I instantiate line 2?
No.
No. Why not? The tilde is the main connector. So I'm going to have to do what first? Quantify negation. That's going to give me a universal, which is good. Can I instantiate line 1? No, I cannot. Because the conditional is the main connector. I cannot instantiate either side of this, which is a bit of a pain in the ass. However, I'm going to want to get D, and D is over here. How am I going to get at it? Answer, using modus tollens. So this is a bit like what just happened in our omnipotence proof. I'm going to want to get the negation of this. In other words, I'm going to want to get this. Notice that this is equivalent to this. And to get this, I'm going to first need not F, U. Maybe I should have picked a name other than U, or at least a predicate other than F. I'm going to need that so that I can turn it into that, so that I can turn it into that, so that I can do modus tollens. Think about what you're doing after you've done quantify negation. One last thing. The universal quantifier that you get, the universal quantified statement that you get when you do quantify negation, you can instantiate from more than once. You can instantiate from it with U, You can also instantiate from it with any other name. And if you haven't instantiated from it more than once, you might have made a mistake. I'll let that sink in for a bit, and then we'll move on to number 3.
So after we get this, we do the
After you get what? This?
fx.
Yeah, after you do get this, do that, modus tollens. Then you're going to have to do some quantifier negation business, instantiation, messing around, and then you're going to end up with not the A. And then you're 2 steps away from this. Okay? Are you stuck? I mean, is there stuff that you can do right now? Or are you stuck? All right, well, let me have a Right. So if you do that, you're going to try and get some kind of contradiction. Well, if you get a contradiction, that's fine. You prove, then you're done.
I don't understand this at all.
What are you universally generalizing?
Not at all.
No, you can't because that's A. So, but if you, that's fine if you do U, but you have, oh, that's right. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to reinstantiate from this with U. So do a U there.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I don't understand.
No, well, yes. No, you want it. Yes, that's true. Yes.
This steps will be okay.
I think so, yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yes.
that's quantifier negation. Basically, like, what I implied that was like wherever the negation is, you can just like move it at one.
Let's see. Well, you can do it this way. Yeah, that would be fine. Let's just see if you do it right. Okay, so quantifier negation extension to the next. Yeah, simple.
If you have like a negative existential, you switch it over.
Is that a U or an A? A. Remember, facilitative, you will need another line reference there. So DS 1110. Don't lose half a point. Okay, simple. Yeah, that's fine. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, you can't use, you just change this all to A's and you're okay. Because then you can add it. You're not going to need U in this one. Yeah, you can't do that. You can't existentially instantiate U. But you don't need U.
I have my car.
What's wrong? If we change this to A, I don't think there's... Right, so you can have the same name. What's wrong with having the same name, so long as the name is A all the time? Oh, I see, yes. Oh, I see what you're saying. You can't existentially instantiate. All right, whatever. Actually, if you're going to
Just pick a name.
it will make your proof a lot simpler. First of all, yeah, so do quantifier negation, and yeah, do quantifier negation, and then don't use U, because your existential you can't use U. And the other thing is, if you're going to do X, do com first, and your proof will be much shorter.
Existential is just the same thing, but what?
Brand. What is this, number 2? Okay, so. Oh, okay. Probably it's better to do stuff before you assume, but anyway, let's so I'm going to negation to universal instantiation. Yes, existential. Now, the tilde will be there, not outside the quantifier, it will be inside the quantifier. Whenever you do generalization, the quantifier has to be on the left. So the tilde is X across the map. And then, so here's the problem. If it's on the left, you haven't got negation of that. You have to move it over there, and by moving it over there, we'll make it universal. So you're going to have to do universal generalization. So there's the universal, so that when you hop the quantifier, it becomes existential.
Otherwise, this is really
So these are going to have to be
easy
used,
to work.
so that you can do universal generalization. So change those to use, do universal generalization, and then quantify negation, and then you can do that. Then let's see what this is. Yeah, there's a mistake here. You're gonna, because you need parentheses around here, and then you can't simplify, you're gonna have to do De
I
Morgan's
did
law,
like a bunch of these practice.
and then you're gonna have to do disjunctive syllogism to get that, not just simplification. But you're pretty close. All right, let's talk about number 3. Number 3 is actually probably the easiest. The only trick to number 3 is that it's unlike the normal method. Because as I said, the normal method is you instantiate to get rid of the quantifiers, you do the proof, and then you generalize to get them back. Well, you are going to generalize, but what's the difference? The difference is you cannot instantiate anything. Obviously, you can't instantiate this one because it doesn't have a quantifier. Why can't you instantiate either of these? Because the conditional is the main connector. So you can't instantiate. So instead what you're going to do is the opposite. You're going to generalize. Because you notice that you have these, and you notice that G is the antecedent of this one, J is the antecedent of this one, so if you simplify and generalize, you can do modus ponens. And then you can instantiate, do conjunction, and generalize, and you're done. So that one's actually pretty easy. Number 4. There are 2 ways to do number 4. Well, there's always many ways to do number 4. I said you will probably need taught. You will only really need taught if you do it the way I did it, which is not assuming anything. Suppose you wanted to do this using conditional proof. What would you assume? Specifically what?
The negation of the conclusion.
What's that?
The negation of the conclusion.
No, that would be if you're going to do reductio ad absurdum. But if you're going to do conditional proof, it would be, you would assume RU. And then you would try and get PU. And then you would have proved if RU then PU by conditional proof. And then what would you do to get the conclusion? Universal generalization. That would give you the conclusion. Now, if you're doing it the way I do, without assuming anything, the thing to note is, essentially, look at the conclusion. It's if R then P. Well, here you have if R then Q, and here you have if Q then P. So if you had this and you could instantiate RU then QU, and you could instantiate QU then PU, you could do what to get something close to this? Hypothetical syllogism. You've got if R then Q, if Q then P. Do hypothetical syllogism so that you have if RU then PU, and then you can do universal generalization. The trouble is, you have to do modus ponens first. So you have to get this. To do modus ponens to get this. The way you're going to get this is out of these 2. Now, of course you instantiate first. And which one do you instantiate first, 2 or 3? 2. So that's going to give you PA or QA. And then you're going to instantiate the other one, and you've got QA then PA. You're going to try and get PA. because then you can do existential generalization and you've got this. Okay? Here's a hint. Remember I said that you would need to use taught. Well, PA is equivalent to this by taught. So if you get this, you can turn it into PA. How can you get this? Well, I will tell you, this is also equivalent to this. If not PA, then PA. And you can get this by hypothetical syllogism, by messing around with these.